All right, welcome to Changing the Stigma. My name is James Cline. I am a combat vet that got involved into human services. My military experience was in the Marine Corps, fresh out of high school. Um, Great experience. I got to do things I never thought I would end up doing. I spent 3 years with President Clinton up at Camp David, got to escort dignitaries around, senators, reps, got to see how things actually happen behind closed doors. So great experience. Got down to Camp Lejeune, spent a few months down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I'll be honest with you. If I never have to go back to that country again, I won't. 110 degrees, humidity off the charts. But again, got to go a lot of great experiences down there. We were down there for the Haitian refugees and Cubans, so got to know a lot of the culture. Again, great experience. And that's what happens in the military is when you get a lot of great experience. But there's a lot of stuff that comes from when you are in the military. And there's that stigma attached that when you get out of the military, that you were in combat, you killed people. It's not the first time I've heard people say that I was a baby killer or I was a train killer, things like that. And they also assume that you suffer from PTSD. So stigma itself is a bad word. It's dishonor. It's a negative term. So what this show is aimed at, and also the radio show is aimed at, is to change that stigma, not just for veterans when it comes to mental health, but it's also there to change that stigma for anybody that suffers from any kind of mental illness. And it's more personal to me when it comes to veterans. I know when I came off my last deployment at the end of 2010, we had been gone for almost 15 months between training and mobilization and actually going in country and then coming out of country. Because of the roles I served with my infantry mountain unit, I was basically the CO's right-hand man. So I was the information officer, I was the intel officer, I oversaw an element called COIST, which stands for Company Intelligence Support Team. So that is an element that kind of gathers up information about what's going on in your area, and they kind of utilize it to basically find out what the enemy's doing, find out what the civilians are doing, and come up with a plan of action that's going to help out everyone. So you learn a lot of skills when you're overseas, when you're in the military, and you don't necessarily have to be overseas to learn these skills, but unfortunately in the civilian world, those folks that don't deal with veterans, they lump everybody together. And it's even worse because they lump people with mental health all together. So let me pose this question to you when it comes to mental health and whether or not there really is a stigma to it. If you were going to call out of work because you didn't want to go in that day or whatever the deal was, what would you choose? Would you choose to call out because you were sick, because you had a cough, you had a headache, or are you going to choose because you're too depressed to go in? Here's another situation to pose to you. If you were going to call out of work because you didn't want to go in or you want to use up some of your time, would you call in to say that you had surgery? Or would you say that you would have to go to residential treatment to help with your mental health issue? Guarantee most people out there are going to say they're going to call out sick. They're going to call because they have a cold. They're going to call because they have some kind of physical ailment going on. I have yet to find anybody that's going to tell me that they're going to call out of work because they have a mental health issue they're dealing with, whether it be PTSD, maybe they're bipolar and they're in a manic state or they're in a depressed state. Maybe they are depressed or they're too anxious. Maybe they have a presentation they weren't ready for, or maybe there's an audit going on at work, or maybe there's a new person that started at work and they're not getting along with them, whatever it might be, and they don't want to go to work. So now they have to have a reason for it. And I don't know anybody that's going to use mental health as that issue because there's a stigma attached to it. I can't imagine what would happen if you went to work the next day or a couple days later. Guarantee you're probably going to get pulled in by HR, like what's going on. There's going to be a lot of questions. People are going to look at you differently. Even the supervisor you talked to when you called out is probably going to look at you differently. They're going to treat you differently. And I can say this from experience because I didn't call out of work, but when I came back from my last deployment, it was very hard to get hired. I mentioned it on a couple other episodes. lots of interviews, but there was that stigma attached to the PTSD. They assumed I had it and I was going to snap and I was going to hurt somebody. So I ended up taking a job at a car dealership in Maine. And what ended up happening was, after I'd been there for a little while, I thought I had a good rapport with my coworkers, with the managers, things like that, did what I was supposed to. Then there was a day that it was really slow. It was a Saturday, it was during the summer. This dealership was in Saco. The beach is not that far away. So most people were probably at the beach other than out car shopping. So what ended up happening was bunch of us sales folks were standing around just shooting a breeze, having a good conversation. And then one of the managers came over and told all the other sales folks that they needed to find something to do to look busy because they didn't feel it looked good with everybody congregating in one area. So I turned to the manager and asked, what could I do? And he just turned to me, he's like, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm like, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I know what your background is, and we're not going to question what you're doing. So how do you think that made me feel, having just served my country, and I'm doing my job, the fact that I was not treated the same way as everyone else? And that's what happens when it comes to the stigma behind mental health issues. Didn't even disclose if I had a mental health issue. It was the fact that they decided that I had it because of my previous job. And that can happen to a lot of folks out there when it comes to mental health. There's that stigma attached. So let me pose a couple more situations to you. Let's say you're driving down the road and you come across a car accident or you see a car accident. Most people are going to stop and they're going to try to help somebody out, whether it's do first aid on them, maybe call 911, whatever it is. They're going to stop and help the person. What's going to happen if you're driving down the road or you're walking on Main Street here in Nashua and you see somebody that's kind of walking on the edge of the road, in and out of the sidewalk, they're clearly talking to themselves, you can see they don't have an earpiece in, they're not on the phone. What are you probably going to do? I'm telling you what I observe out there when I do outreach, when I'm walking around. Most people will take a wide berth around that individual because they're going to think that person is psycho, they're crazy, they don't know what they're going to do. Well, I'm telling you right now, when it comes to mental health, really what people need to do is they need to be understanding. They need to be non-judgmental. What's the worst thing that's probably going to happen to you if you approach that individual and see if they need assistance? I know a lot of you out there listening and watching are probably going to tell me that they're afraid that you're going to get attacked. Well, I'm telling you right now, the statistics actually show the opposite. Less than 4% of the people that have a mental health issue actually commit any type of violence. And if you actually look into it, when you investigate what the issue was, if that person with the mental health issue actually was violent, you're going to find that somebody else actually probably instigated or caused that issue with that person. More than likely, the person with the mental health issue, they are the ones that are more likely to be the victims of a violent crime because people take advantage of them, they exploit them. And, we need to change that stigma because that's what's attached. It doesn't help when the media puts out there that folks with mental health are violent. The most recent movie that dealt with that was the new Joker movie. Immediately you see him, he's in the Arkham psych hospital, the social worker, the funds have been cut, so he no longer gets any services, he's not taking medications, and what does he turns into? This big violent person, and he commits all these crimes, all these things are going on. Well, again, that is not what happens when it comes to mental health and those individuals that suffer from a mental health illness. Even if it is a severe issue, less than 0.03% of the population will ever have any form of schizophrenia. That's one that's portrayed a lot in the movies, that they have schizophrenia, they're hearing voices telling them to kill someone, do something to somebody. Well, I'm going to tell you from my personal experience, working with individuals that suffer from schizophrenia or paranoid schizophrenia. An example I like to give is an individual I work with down in Massachusetts. How many people can say, even if they don't suffer from mental health, that they've worked in the same place for more than 20 years. I can't say it. Other than the military with 13 years in, most of my jobs, about 3.5 years. Currently where I work now, I've been there for about 5.5 years. You know, there's good things, there's things that can be improved upon there. But again, maybe I'll get up to that point. But this individual was actually working for over 20 years in the same place. Part-time, went and did his thing, but he suffered from schizophrenia. He had multiple voices telling him to do things. So what he did was he built up this skill. In mental health, it's called coping skills. So he developed this skill, so when he got home from work, he would go to his room and he would talk it out with the voices. And if you didn't know him, it could be a little disturbing sometimes when you hear what he's talking about, what he's saying. After the first couple times I heard it, I realized that he wasn't talking to me, he was talking to the voices. He would say things like, I don't want to kill James. James is a good person. But it's me learning and understanding what he was doing, what he was going through, and what mental health is. And again, this was his skill to deal with it. And it allowed him to be able to work at the same place for all those years. As far as I know, he's still working there. So that would be, he'd be up to like 26 years in the same place. He was able to save up hundreds of thousands of dollars into his account, be able to go on a vacation when he wanted to, needed very minimal support from the staff. If anything, it was more maybe an overlooking his meds, but he would take care of the medications he was supposed to. He'd be able to communicate with his providers about what was going on, if anything changed, if he needed any help with anything. So this is somebody that had schizophrenia, which has such a negative stigma, well beyond any of the other mental health issues that you could suffer from. And he was very, very successful in life. Another coworker I worked with, she developed schizophrenia when she was going through Harvard. So after her first year, she had to drop out. She got treatment with a combination of therapy and medications. And now, this many years later, she's a director of services and mental health. She's a huge part of the community around her. So many people turn to her for hope that you can get through it. And that's part of it. If we can change the stigma behind it to get people to come forward for help, because the average person takes almost 10 years to come forward for many reasons. Maybe they don't want to think that they have a mental health issue. They're too prideful, which happens with a lot of the veterans out there. They don't want to come forward for help because when they were in the military, if they got hurt or injured physically, they would be just told, suck it up, move on. And sometimes you're in a situation where you have to do that. You could be in a firefight somewhere and you might have gotten injured and it's not that serious to have a medic take care of it. Or maybe it is serious and the closest medic is a half a click away, 300 or 400 yards away. So you have to kind of put yourself together and get to where those services are. And that's what we need to do when it comes to mental health. We need to make sure that we have a positive connotation with mental health issues, and that's going to be out there getting people educated when it comes to mental health. I'd like to see the day when we actually are able to call out, because yes, we are too depressed that day. It could be many reasons. You could have things go on in your life. You could have something negative going on at work, and maybe you need to speak to somebody about it before you come back. Maybe something happened at home, whatever it might be. There should be that open communication in there. Now, I know a lot of companies, agencies, they have a thing called an EAP, an Employee Assistance Program, but even some of those programs are very limited. You might only be able to talk to somebody up to like 6 times before you might have to start paying for it. So on the first episode when Mel Moran was here, a local alderman and state rep, talked about parity when it comes to services. We need to make sure that the medical insurance and the mental health insurance and what's covered is equal. Because at the end of the day, we need to realize that mental health issues are a medical condition and they need to be addressed. What I don't understand is why there's such a stigma attached when it comes to an illness of your brain, but we have no problem helping somebody out when there's an illness to the rest of your body. If you came to me and told me that you had cancer, I'm going to feel empathetic. I might even feel sympathetic, especially if it's stage 3 or 4 and it's untreatable. But I also feel the same way when it comes to mental health issues. When somebody comes to me because they're struggling with day-to-day activities, they say they don't want to go out shopping, they want to stay in the house, they've been sleeping way too much or too little. They say they're very depressed, they don't want to talk to anybody, they're not eating, they're not showering. I want to be empathetic to the situation, and that's how I approach things. That the medical issues, the physical issues, and the mental health issues are all equivalent. And depending on who you are, how you were raised, what your values are, what your morals are, is how you're going to get through those mental health issues yourself. You're either going to be educated into it or you need to be educated into it. And there's multiple resources out there when it comes to educating yourself on mental health issues. Everyone jumps on WebMD or anything else online when it comes to a physical issue. How many times do you see ads on TV for prescription medications? Those are there all the time. Very few times do you see advertising on TV for mental health services. There are a few, but those are usually substance use related. Very few times do you find anything that's mental health related. And let me point this out to you. Here in the state of New Hampshire on July 16th, we had a great resource go live in this state. I know everyone out there should be aware of or is aware of 911 when it comes to emergency services. The fire department, the EMTs, the police, we all know that 911 is there. But on July 16th, 988 went live in this state. And it also went live across other states across the country. So 988 is a resource for mental health. So the way to think of it is 988 is the equivalent of 911, but for mental health. And the great thing they did was when 988 went live is prior to it, they went through and cross-trained everybody. So if you call 911 and 911 dispatcher or operator determines that it's a mental health issue, they can transfer you over to 988 to get those individuals that are specifically trained to deal with the mental health issues. Nobody wants 3 police officers and 10 firemen showing up if they're dealing with anxiety. That's probably going to make things worse. Nobody wants to be taken to the hospital and put into a small room with a bed and TV with a guard standing out it, and you have to ask permission every time you need to go to the bathroom with the threat of being strapped down to the bed if you get upset. So by having 988 in place, you can have trained professionals go out, talk to the individual, and determine what the best course of action is. That could be maybe they are safe to stay there and get connected with some services. Maybe they need to have their provider contacted and adjust their medications, or maybe they need to get together with a therapist or a counselor. Maybe all the way up to the point where they actually need to go inpatient because they have thoughts of hurting themselves or someone else. When I talk about 988 and the lack of advertising, ever since it went live, I've been talking with everyone I know, if they even know about 988. I have yet to find a person that knew what 988 was and that it had already gone live. I have not seen any advertising. I will admit, I don't watch a lot of network TV. If I do watch TV, it's probably Netflix or Hulu or Prime, probably watching a series or a movie. So I can't say for sure if they're not advertising it on the network TVs. I recently read the local paper Hippo, which is a great resource for going out there and finding things to do around the southern New Hampshire. So I read a little tidbit in the very beginning of the Hippo. It looked like it took place in Londonderry, where Governor Sununu had signed I think it was a bill or an act to go into effect that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the number would now be on student IDs. Great idea. So we can also take that to another step. What I did not read in there was that 988 was going to be put on there. The only time I've seen 988 was in that article towards the end. They just happened to mention that 988 went live. So the way 988 is going to work is you call 988. If they determine it's a mental health issue, they're going to determine, screen it, and find out what the best course of action, up to where they can actually have a crisis team members come out to you. And the way the crisis team works is a licensed master's level clinician and a peer support specialist can respond to your spot, where you live, where you're working, wherever you're at, around the state, and they can talk to you and determine what's going on, and then put a plan together going forward from there. And again, it could be, the whole goal is to keep you from going to the hospital. The goal is to keep you from hurting yourself or anyone else, and it's to make sure you get healthy again, that you have the hope, knowing that whatever you're going through, that you can get through it. And then from there, you can become a productive part of whatever your life is, whatever your role is, wherever you are in your community, your family. And that's the whole goal of changing the stigma. So it's great that this resource is now available in the state of New Hampshire. That's on top of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that's out there. The number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. And there actually is a resource when you call that if you are a veteran, you can press 1 after you dial that 1-800 number, and you're going to be able to talk to somebody that has been trained or is a veteran themselves to help you get through what are some common issues that veterans might be dealing with. Veterans struggle with reintegrating back into society. I understand there's a complete culture difference between there. One thing that I struggled with when I got out, not just the first time, but even the second time I got out of the military, was people just not showing up on time. I was told to be a little bit more lax when it comes to being on time, and more understanding with people's situations. Yes, there are times when people abuse that. You know, they're constantly showing up for 5 or 10 minutes late. And in the military, you adjust. If you know you're going to be late, you need to be early. You need to adjust what you're doing prior to that. Another culture shock when it comes to veterans reiterating is that a lot of the skills they might have had when they were in may not transfer back out to the civilian world. I know with me having, almost 13 years in the infantry, combat arms, a lot of those skills do not transfer back over to the civilian world. Nobody cares how fast you can run a 3-mile run. Nobody cares how many sit-ups or push-ups you can do in a minute or two. Nobody cares that you can ruck around in an 85 backpack and walk 20 miles without stopping. That is not something that translates to most jobs out here in the community. What you need to do is determine what skills you did bring out of the military, which is leadership, being on time, team player, always there to back people up, and many, many other skills out there. But one of the things you do not usually take out of the military is some form of mental health issue. And if you did, there are resources out there for you when it comes to mental health issues, if you're a veteran, if you're a non-veteran. Because if you can be a non-veteran, but you live with a veteran that might be struggling, and you need to know those resources. Even in the civilian world, you may not be suffering from a mental health issue, but you might have a family member that does. My kids know that they have an open line to me to call me. And they know that if they call me more than one time in a row, so if they call me immediately right after they tried to call me if I didn't answer, that I know something's going on and they need to talk to me. All my kids do it. They vent to me. We kind of go through the situation. I just did it recently with my oldest son. A few weeks ago, I did it with my oldest daughter. They're young adults. They're living their lives, but sometimes they just need somebody to talk to. And I tell them all those resources that are out there, and there's many resources out there for anyone out there. I don't care if you're a veteran, a non-veteran, you're a civilian, you're a teenager, you're an adult. There are many, many resources out there that you could be utilizing. So some of those resources here, and one that I just mentioned is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I talked about 988. That's another great resource. If you go on NewHampshire988.com and you don't feel like talking to somebody over the phone, you go online and chat with somebody. You can do an online chat with them. And you also have 211 in this state. So that's another great resource. Maybe you are struggling and you want to raise your hand for help. You call 211, you let them know what you're looking for, what you're struggling with, and they'll get you connected with those resources out there. There's 10 community health centers across the state. So there's usually one within driving distance of you. And for some folks, most of those community health centers are located in urban areas. So you might even be able to walk to it if you don't have a vehicle. Now that because of COVID, we have better access to telehealth services. So a lot of it can be done online. It can be done by video. You can do it by phone. So there's a lot of great resources out there when it comes to mental health issues. We also have the Rapid Response Access Point here in the state. So what they did is they took all those crisis teams that were located in Concord, Nashua, and Manchester, and they combined them all into one. So now you just call 833-710-6477. Again, that's 833-710-6477. That's the New Hampshire Rapid Response Access Point for mental health. Same thing is going to happen just like 988. You're going to call that. It's going to go into a central dispatch area. They're going to determine the best course of action, and that could be up to having a crisis team come out to you or getting you connected with a community health center or whatever they determine might be the best resource out there. So as you can tell, throughout this whole show, talking about those resources that are out there that can be utilized, you can educate yourself online, you can go to a community health center and ask questions, but what we need to do is we need to fight that stigma. We need to make sure there's not dishonor in telling somebody that you're struggling with depression, that you're struggling with anxiety, that you might be have trouble leaving the house. It's understandable today because of COVID and all those restrictions. So as a community, let's all come together and have a positive spin on the stigma and mental health to make sure everyone gets everything they need.